What's going on, everyone? Coach Damien, the Shift Method. Hope all of you are having a wonderful day. Got my new podcast for y'all. And this one is going to be a bit different. As you can tell, there's no guest here today. I decided to try up something new, and that is to do a fitness and wellness Q&A. So about a week and a half ago, I put out a question poll that I did every single day on Instagram. And I got about a handful of questions here for y'all that people submitted. And if y'all like this, I'd be more than happy to do this in the future. I think this is a cool way to interact and engage with y'all. So yeah, a really, really exciting thing to do for y'all. That way I can answer some stuff that y'all personally are interested directly outside of having some awesome guests that I have come on to the pod and just talk about other various health and fitness topics. And maybe if it becomes popular enough, maybe we structure it, maybe we narrow down on particular topics. But for right now, kind of keep it pretty open forum to whatever y'all want to learn about. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. I got my list of questions here. I think we have 4 of them. I think one is maybe a part or 2 parts maybe, but I'm going to read them and kind of go into the little nuances of my answer for it. And then we'll kind of jump into the next one. So first question is how to get off of a lifting plateau. I want to stay active and consistent with training as well while trying to get off this plateau. So this is a great question. So training plateaus, just in case anyone isn't aware, is kind of when you have this baseline or this consistent, non-change in progress over time, right? So for example, if you're training for something like weight loss, maybe you are losing weight over time, right? The scale is going down, body composition is changing in a positive way. But then for a series of multiple weeks in a row, nothing's changing. Your weight has kind of stayed the same. You're like, crap, I feel like I'm not really going anywhere at this point. Now, I don't know what the context of this is. My guess, since they're talking about lifting, is potentially it's with strength training or hypertrophy training. So I'll kind of frame my answer in that context. First and foremost, if you think you're going through a plateau, it's important to, understand that progress isn't always linear. This is especially true for my lifters who have been, doing it for, anything over a year, somewhat consistently. Progress isn't always going to be week to week where, you're hitting a PR on a lift every single week, or you can always add 5 to 10 pounds on the bar or on the selectorized machine, right? So if that's happening and you have like a week or two where you're like, man, I just can't add 5 more pounds, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a plateau. I would say if you're having, multiple weeks, maybe like 3 to 4 of like, I'm having no shape of progress in any way, shape, or form, like, a reps in reserve of 2 on a deadlift is, the same weight as it always is and hasn't changed for a month, or I haven't moved the weight on my barbell bench press at all, or my session RPE is staying the same and my lifts are all staying the same. So like everything is just kind of staying kind of consistent and you're not noticing any progress for an extended period of time, then that is kind of a time to go in and check and see, okay, is something going on? Have I kind of hit a lifting plateau and what do I do? So first and foremost, make sure that it's not just like a temporary thing because progress isn't linear, but that it's actually something that has happened quite consistently for, 3 to 4 weeks or so. And we can start from there. In the context of strength, I would say the first thing, so let's say you definitely think you hit a lifting plateau. I always say start with your program, right? So without getting into too much of the nuances of strength training, you always want to make sure that your program is going to be auto-regulated in some way. What I mean by that is you shouldn't program necessarily and just be like, yeah, I'm going to add 5 pounds to the bar every single week. I'm going to, do more sets every single week, because we know at a certain point in time, that's just not going to work, right? It doesn't, even for people who are new, there's going to come a point where adding 5 pounds to the bar isn't going to work. Or if you're training for hypertrophy training, if you add a set every single week, after 10 or 12 weeks, like, what are you going to do? 5 exercises and do 10 sets on each exercise? You'll be at the gym for 4 hours and the work capacity is going to be insane. And you probably won't be able to handle it because barely anyone can. So definitely understanding that your program has to be auto-regulated. What does that mean? That means that day to day, you are taking into account certain physiological factors, things like how you're feeling, how sore are you, your emotional state, your physical state. Certain days you might realize like, man, I feel stronger today, or I feel kind of tired today. Taking that into account, and then watching your performance on your warm-up sets and kind of your first working set and seeing where you are for the day and what you feel like is going to be a good weight or set or rep range for you on that given day. People always think, and I've had this issue too, where it's like, well, on bench press, I did, 205 for 5 last week, so I need to do at least 205 for my set of 5 this week. And that is not true at all. And if you use less weight on the bar on 1 week out of the training block, that doesn't mean that you're moving backwards. In fact, it actually might mean that for that particular session, that was the exact appropriate weight that you needed. And then the next week or 2 weeks later, you're finding out that, oh, okay, now I'm back to where I was, or maybe I made even a little jump in the weight or in the RP or whatever it may be. And that was awesome. That's auto-regulation, is taking where you are today, using your internal and subjective feedback, as well as your objective feedback from how you're producing in your warm-up sets to determine this is where I'm going to be today. Because if you aren't using those kind of feedback systems and you're just kind of arbitrarily adding weight or adding sets, what are you going to do when you have a shitty day and you're supposed to use 5-10 more pounds or 5-10 more percent on the bar than you did previously, and you're doing your warm-up sets and they are just, it's a grind, right? It's a grind for like, you know, if you're doing 135 on bench for a set of 10 and you do like 95 pounds for like your second warm-up set, and you're like, damn, that felt kind of heavy. Like, what are you going to go past 135 because it says you have to on your program that you wrote arbitrarily? I would recommend I would say that's not the best thing to do. I would not recommend that. So take yourself where you are today. It's eating that big piece of humble pie and saying like, hey man, like this is where it is, but it's going to have benefits in the long run for you because it actually is adjusting the program to what you can do today, and it will produce positive adaptation. If you don't, you're going to get, emotionally frustrated because you're like, why am I not doing the program properly like I had set to? And it's not going to make progress because you're going to be too fatigued to reap the benefits of the adaptation from the stimulus that you gave yourself that day. So overall, I would definitely make sure that your program is a bit auto-regulated. So that way you can, change day to day, week to week based on, what you want to do. The other thing to consider is, let's say your programming is pretty sound. You're like, no, Damien, I'm definitely using auto-regulation. Everything seems good. No matter how much I adjust my program, I'm just feeling crappy, like pretty consistently for like 2 or 3 weeks plus. It might be time to, consider some overtraining syndrome, right? So maybe you're losing motivation. You're really tired and sore more than usual, or at least it's happening more consistently than it otherwise would. Like you hit a set, you do upper body, and for some reason your legs are a tad sore the next day, and you're like, wow, what the hell's going on? Maybe you're getting sick. Maybe you're having some like flu-like symptoms or some cold-like symptoms, and you're like, I'm not feeling too great, and you're not sleeping. You're losing interest. If you're starting to see a culmination of those things, it might be a sign that, hey, maybe it's time to take a little bit of a deload week. And I'm personally the believer, unless you get into like some really specific hypertrophy training, that deloads can kind of be taken when these symptoms arise, not that you necessarily have to plan for them, right? So, for example, you're doing strength training, you don't have a competition in mind. You're kind of just trying to get stronger over time, and you're making great progress. But then you kind of come to this point, and you're having like 3 weeks of like, I'm feeling really sore and beat up. My joints are aching. I'm like not sleeping well. I'm more stressed and agitated than normal, and I don't want to go to the gym. Take a week and do some things that like you don't otherwise do that would kind of just excite you. You're like, man, I really want to do like some like HIIT training on like the rower today. Like that sounds fun. I haven't done that in like 4 months since I've been doing squat, bench, and deadlift. Or maybe it's, if you have access to it, man, I'd really like to go hiking, because I haven't been outside in a while, and that would feel really good to be active outdoors. Take a week. If you really can, you feel like antsy about it, take 3 or 4 days, just don't do anything that's really related to your program. Give your like mind and body a little bit of a reset. Gets a lot of food in you and get a lot of sleep. That's going to be extremely helpful for repairing your body. If you're feeling sick, hopefully within a 4 to 7 day period, whatever ailment you're dealing with kind of goes away. And then you can start fresh and start kind of at like a baseline intro block or intro week to your program, and then ramp things back up and see if that feels better. A lot of times that can help out as well. And kind of along the lines of, deload is just, mitigating life stress and other things going on. That can be extremely beneficial if you're kind of running into a situation where you're noticing like 3-4 weeks, I'm not getting any progress. If life stress and other things are kicking in, it might be time to kind of just dial back a little bit for like a week or two, adjust and address those other things in your life. Kind of like we talk about, like, dimensions of wellness, address other things like your social well-being, your emotional well-being, etc. And then once you kind of poured into those other areas and that seems balanced out to where you like it, then start ramping up your training again. So those are some things. Of course, there's other nuances with like your diet and things like that. But if, making sure you're eating well and enough for your goal, but definitely looking for signs of overtraining or overtraining syndrome can also be very helpful as well. Okay. Moving on to the next one. This is a fun one. What is your go-to meal / snack for a workout? So this one honestly varies. My workouts, I do still schedule them because I want to make sure I have time for myself. Generally, they're done either early morning or late at night. That's kind of the range that I have right now. If it's early enough, I actually don't eat breakfast or don't eat a meal before I train, I should say. And that's not because there's some like magical formula to doing fasted training. For some people, it works and that's fine. But it's one of those things where I'm up early, I feel good. If I'm really hungry, I feel like I need it, I'll eat. But most of the time, if it's like 7 or 8 in the morning, I don't have to eat right away and I can hit my training session. So in that case, I wouldn't have a snack. If it's after breakfast, breakfast is sometimes my favorite go-to pre-workout meal. I'll do my current kick that I've done right now, which I posted about, is doing some scrambled eggs with vegetables, mixed veggies. I do like onions, bell peppers, and jalapenos. And then I do it with some homemade Greek yogurt mix. It's vanilla Greek yogurt with some blueberries, chia seeds, peanut butter, and cinnamon. Looks really gnarly, but it tastes amazing. If it is not that time and I'm like specifically picking out a snack that I'm going to do, right now, my really good go-to snack is a banana with a chocolate muscle milk. I really like muscle milk. I grew up on it when I was in high school. It's like my go-to easy to pack snack. It's very tasty. It's about, if you buy it in bulk, it's like a little less than $2 a bottle, which isn't bad for protein. It's got like 24 to 32 grams of protein, depending on the type that you buy. Nothing wrong with sugar, but if you're someone who is like, conscious with sugar, or sugar maybe makes you have kind of a crash later in the day, I believe the one that I have only has 1 or 2 grams of sugar and it has a little bit of carbohydrate. And then the banana helps with the sugar and carbohydrate. My body responds very well to sugar and carbs. I love fruit. So that's a really, really good meal for me. And the chocolate muscle milk just tastes phenomenal. It's really, really good. If I don't have a banana or if I forget to bring a banana, I've been doing a little bit of goldfish lately. So muscle milk with some goldfish. That has kind of been my go-to because my body responds pretty well to carbohydrate and protein throughout the day, especially before workout. So yeah, that's my go-to meal is muscle milk and banana. All right. Number 3. Have you had any past fitness or health related beliefs that you believed were dogma, but came to find out aren't necessarily true / best practice? Yeah. So some things that were more dogmatic that I once believed, but now I don't. Yeah. So there's 2 main things that have kind of come to mind as my evolution as a trainer. And there's probably a bunch of things, but the 2 big ones that stand out is I'll categorize this as like an overarching thing is kind of like the stretching / postural body mechanic fallacy. From my own anecdotal experience as a coach and working with people in my own training, as well as some of the research and literature that I've dived in, I'm no longer sold on the fact that static stretching and in relation to that, posture matter all too much in most contexts. What do I mean by that? I've kind of talked about this before with some of my physical therapy friends. I believe Morgan Sunderland's podcast was one that I harped on this quite a bit. But, the original thought, and it's still pervasive quite a bit today, is that static stretching, right, holding stretches for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute plus is going to long-term increase your flexibility and long-term reduce your risk of injury. This is something that you have to do if you want to, have an active, healthy, long-living lifestyle. By not doing these things, you're more likely to be a risk of injury or hurting your or of developing postural abnormalities that is also going to be bad for your health. And so that's something that I used to do. I used to be really into like imbalances of the body, whether it's like your shoulders being rolled forward or excessive lordotic curve in the lower back, looking at things like tight hamstrings, tight hip flexors, et cetera, et cetera. But when I started getting exposed to some other information about, how the body works in terms of imbalances and how it works in terms of stretching and posture, some of those beliefs started getting chipped away quite a bit. To kind of give an example of that, a lot of the posture analysis of things like upper cross syndrome, like rounding the shoulders forward and anterior pelvic tilt, Some of that research actually comes from cadaver studies and animal studies, and the animals being quadrupeds. So cadaver studies, they've done some with like spines where they see, how much can they manipulate it to the point where it breaks or has issues. Or with, quadruped animals, that doesn't make much sense because we're bipedal, we're upright versus an animal that's on all fours. So you start seeing like, well, maybe some of these studies don't make much sense on a dynamic living organism when you're looking at things like a cadaver. Some other examples, there's some research that I've read where, anterior pelvic tilt is kind of just a natural thing that occurs in people. Most people have their pelvis slightly tilted forward. There are rare exceptions where people have more of a flat back just naturally where their pelvis is rotated backwards in a posterior tilt. But most people, whether it's general population or athlete population, have an anterior pelvic tilt, and it doesn't seem to lead to any other like adverse outcomes in their health or injury status. With stretching is another weird one where you can stretch and it'll feel good and it can temporarily reduce soreness and it will temporarily increase your flexibility. But long term, it doesn't seem that it can, make you flexible forever. It's something that you have to constantly do. And it seems to be specific to the stretch that you do. So for example, if you want to get really good at a seated hamstring stretch, you got to do a seated hamstring stretch and gradually expose yourself to it over time. And you have to spend a lot of time doing it. It can take, a couple minutes per muscle group. Well, if I need to do my entire lower body or upper body in a session, that could be 10 plus minutes. So some research has come out showing that another way to improve flexibility long-term that has the same, if not better, benefits in static stretching is actually resistance training. So things like if you want to get better at squats or improve your flexibility / range of motion in a squat, the best thing to do is to probably squat, because the kind of theory that I'm understanding when it comes to flexibility range of motion is your body will get into positions it feels comfortable getting into. Meaning when I hold a stretch initially, and we can all relate to this, when you hold that static hamstring stretch, at first it's really tight, it's really tense, and it's very uncomfortable. But after about 10 seconds or so, because that's a natural reflex that your body does, after about 10 seconds, your GTO inhibits your muscle spindle, and then things start to relax. You have this sensation of ease, and then your muscle actually lengthens because the neural tone on the muscle has now gone down. It's actually a nervous system adaptation in the moment, not a musculoskeletal adaptation. What we see is that as your nervous system and your muscles are primed over time through lifting and other movement patterns, your body actually says and grants you access to doing those lifts with greater range of motion. You might have experienced this anecdotally yourself, for example, on a squat, where maybe the first couple of weeks you started, you could barely get to halfway down the squat. And then 2 or 3 months later, you're doing an ass to grass squat. And maybe you weren't even really doing that much stretching. You're like, how did I get down here? It's because you got better at the skill. You gradually expose yourself to it. It's a lot of time under the bar because each set can last 30 seconds to a minute and you're doing multiple sets, maybe training squats multiple times a week. And your body has now gotten accustomed to that movement and it allows you to do it. So on the stretching side, is it something that you have to do? No, I still do it with some clients because they like it, because it feels good. I'll occasionally do it myself for the feel good effect, but it's not this panacea that is going to be, injury preventative. It's not going to correct any issues that you have with alignment or posture. The human body is perfectly imperfect. Our heart is more centered to one side of our body. Our liver is more centered to one side of our body. 90% of the population has one limb longer than the other, where most of us have one side dominant over the other. And that is by design. That is for a reason. Those things are not things that need to be corrected. It's just how your body is. And thinking that we have to fix those things, or that because things are slightly imbalanced or one muscle might be larger or more dominant than the other, that's a problem. I don't think it's quite substantiated right now in the research. And so that's kind of the stance that I'm taking right now on that subject. Again, not, demonizing stretching or posture. For some people in some contexts, it might matter and it might feel good, and that's cool. But that's kind of a big thing I changed my mind on in the last 4 years, I would say. And then another big one that I've kind of thought about and changed probably within the last, probably similar timeline, but every year it's like the layers break off more and more and more, is the conversation around obesity. It's the stereotypical thing. People say like people who are obese, or I shouldn't even say that, people who have obesity are lazy. That's a big thing I've changed is my language. And before people think like that's too PC or whatever, you can think what you want, but I would consider obesity a disease. And we don't say people have cancer. We don't say that they are cancer. So I don't think we should say people are obese. I think we should say people have obesity. They're dealing with a biological, psychological, and social disease that is affecting them negatively in their health. I'm not going to call them the ailment. They are dealing with an ailment, right? So people with dealing with obesity, it's often thought that they are just lazy. They don't have willpower. It's as simple as calories in, calories out. And that's not the whole picture. That's a very, narrow view of it. It is true. I do always advocate for personal responsibility, right? Taking ownership of your life as much as you can. But the kind of way I always describe it is, each person, based on their biological, psychological, and social factors, have a greater or lesser ability to take action or initiate change. It doesn't mean they can't, but the likelihood that it's going to happen is determined by those factors in your environment, in your biology, and, through the way that you were raised. Given those things, you then have to, with a coach or with yourself, however the person is going to do it, you have to look at ways to minimize controlled barriers and find ways to help them be active and have a better lifestyle and eat a better diet to help alleviate the obesity that they're dealing with. I used to kind of think more so on the, it's purely the environment side where it's like, hey, there's a lot of food in the area and it's our more sedentary lifestyle here in the Western world. And that's just it. But I'm realizing as time goes on, like even a lot of like the new like endocrinology coming out about obesity and how it impacts your hormonal system and how like a lot of these foods and not to demonize the food industry, but just how some foods that do a good job of feeding people, how the combination of the sugar with the fat, with the sodium, it can have addictive qualities and they're not very filling and they are high in calories and low in nutrients. It's a recipe for, people developing obesity-like disease. And it's very hard to get rid of because our environment is and our jobs and lives are very complicated. And it's not so easy to just, work out 2 hours a day, have access to good food and good shopping, have the money to make the good purchases of the food and shopping. And then also, how you grew up and how your parents and your friends and your social circle influence your behaviors to get to where you are today. Right. So it's multifactorial. There's a lot of things to consider with it. And I think we're moving or shifting in a positive direction because I hear people talking about it, even a lot of doctors discussing this subject. Is not as simple as just, people are lazy or don't have, strong willpower. So that is very positive outlook that's coming. But that's definitely something that I've changed my mind on quite a bit going from undergrad to grad school, which is, hopefully for the best. And then the final question: is working out 5 to 7 days per week more beneficial than 2 to 3 times per week? Which is better, or are they kind of the same? So this is also a good question in terms of like, I'm going to give the it depends answer. I think it depends on a few things. First one is kind of like your fitness level. So if you're someone who is like just starting out, is not very active, I would not recommend to work out 5 to 7 times a week. That happens sometimes where people are very motivated and amped up, which is awesome. I'm happy that people are excited, but it might be a time where as a coach, you say, hey, like, let's start with a couple days and work from there. Reason being, it's kind of one of those things where I say, start juggling one ball before you start, just grab 8 things at once and try to juggle them, right? If I meet someone and they're brand new and they haven't been active, I'm probably going to start with 2 or 3 because that's going to cover most of my bases, at least initially. I can see if they're able to stick with that. And then I can add more as time goes on. Rather than giving them a crap ton, they get sore, they get really fatigued, potentially injured just from the load management standpoint. And then they lose motivation. They think that it was a waste of time and money. It's always better to start on the conservative side, and then you can always ramp up, right? So I start with about 2 to 3 times a week. If it's like a general fitness person, it's very simple. We're training either upper body and lower body. So we hit each muscle group once a week, or we're doing 2 full body days and some kind of conditioning. So we're getting the benefits of both our cardiovascular fitness and our resistance training. So for like the new person or like the general fitness person who's like kind of has that much experience, 2 to 3 days is going to be a good place to start. And then as time goes on and they've kind of adapted to it, that can be a progression over time is to add a day or 2 in the coming months. Now, of course, if you are more trained, you may need more days to kind of hit your goals. For example, if you're someone who's been pretty active for at least a year or so and you're trying to build some muscle mass, you might want to do more than 2 or 3 times a week because you want to make sure you hit each muscle group at least 2 times a week. So unless you're doing full body days every single time, which is going to be a lot of time and energy, you might need to do like a 5-day split or a 4-day split. Maybe like, 2 full bodies, an upper and a lower, upper, lower, however you want to break it down. You might just need more days to match your fitness level and match your particular goal that you have. Another kind of consideration is time. Time is a limited resource. Of course, there's conversations about how we manage our time, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, you got it pretty narrowed down. And because of life, because of obligations that you have, you really only got enough time to go to the gym 3 times a week, but maybe you can go for an hour and a half and you dedicate that out. Or let's say you're like, you know what, I need to go more I have to go more frequently with less time because that's what I have available. So maybe you can go 5 times a week, but you only have 40 minutes as opposed to an hour and a half, right? It's going to depend on your schedule and the time block you have available to you. You don't have to fit yourself into kind of a narrow box of like, I have to do 4 times a week or 5 times a week for an hour. No, you can do 5 times a week for 40 minutes. I know some people like to do 6 or 7 times a week, but they like to do it in 20 or 30-minute blocks where they do something that's intense and short, or they do something that's mildly active, like going for a walk or doing some like cardio. And then they'll do something like a full body circuit that they can accomplish in 20 or 30 minutes. And that works for them. They just have to do more days over time. I know other people where they're like, nah, I'd rather be in the gym for, an hour and a half to 2 hours, 3 times a week and have to go every single day. And so they'll do like, a full body day 3 times a week, but they'll, get it done Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and that's it. So it really just depends on your fitness level, your goals, and how much time you have available. That's kind of a good place to start. And that kind of wraps up all the questions that we have. Again, I hope y'all enjoyed this kind of different type of podcast, very first fitness and wellness Q&A. If y'all like this, please be sure to let me know. Y'all know where to find me. This is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and it's going to be on YouTube. So please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. As always, on Instagram and TikTok at _shift_method. The Shift Method store is still up at shiftmethod.org/store. So you can check out the merchandise or click any of the take action buttons to see if I'm available to coach you. I only have like a couple 8 a.m. spots left. That is it. So maybe one more client if y'all are available, and some exciting online stuff coming soon within the next month or so. So I'll be sure to announce that when it happens. And if y'all like this, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to do it again every now and again. Won't be every week because I want to continue doing the podcast with guests, but it is something that we can start rolling in maybe, once a month or something like that. We'll see how it goes. Otherwise, thank y'all for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Later.